So, it is January the 25th and it's lovely out. It's +3. I can still see my breath, but it's nice. So, yesterday we went to, at around just before 7 in the evening, we went to Public Professors series, Dr. Alexander Darku, The Building Blocks of Africa's Development, Resources, Politics, and Economics. And these are great to go to. You can look that up if you're interested. I would suggest everyone goes. It's they do it once a month, and I think it's on, I don't know, it's on Thursday, I think, every month. You know what, I'd have to look into that. I haven't been paying attention. I don't go to them all the time. There was last year, James stood me up for one of them, because this is like our dates, because they're free. We go and there's a university lecturer, and the talks they're really interesting, and you get free food. They have a whole big buffet lineup set up for you, and you do have to pay for alcohol, but seeing as we don't drink alcohol, that works out just great for us. So anyway, now I didn't agree with what the lecturer was saying. Honestly, I didn't think he was that good a lecturer compared to the last woman, Dr. Amy Shaw. She was great, and honestly, I really didn't care that much about what she had to say, but it was interesting. It was it was something I hadn't even known anything about, so I'm glad that she did a talk on it. But she was just such an excellent lecturer, and she seemed lovely. She seemed like a lovely person. James said she reminds me of your sister, my sister, and she does. She totally reminds me of my sister. So anyway, but yesterday's lecture, basically the guy was saying there's a whole lot of unskilled labor in Africa, so businesses should get in there and exploit that resource, and that, somehow that's going to benefit Africa. And what I was thinking to myself is, here's this guy, he said, he was talking about how the people who were educated, they had publicly funded education, and the ones who got the education, they left. Like he's this professor, he came to Canada, but Africa funded his education, right? So wouldn't it be fair? Like, of course this is draining their economy if they're publicly funding to educate their own population, and then the educated part of the population leaves. So why not, if you're going to leave Africa after getting a publicly funded education, you have to pay that back. So you pay back right from grade school all the way through, whatever publicly funded education you got in that country, you have to pay that back. And that could be in installments when you get to your country that you've immigrated into or whatever. But that sounds fair to me. And then they would have more money to put into educating their population, and some of them might end up staying. I don't know. Or at least they'd get their money back when people leave and go decide to give lectures for the University of Lethbridge. Or but my husband, he was saying, well, why not, say there's a lot, like we've noticed the doctors from South Africa are so superior to the doctors that we have here. Like, it's just not even comparable. When you go to a South African doctor, you feel like you're actually getting medical treatment. It's shocking, because as a Canadian, you're used to not. So anyway, but like James said, we would like to have those doctors come over. So as that benefits Canadian citizens to pay back their education to Africa. Do you see what I'm saying? So then Canada could actually pay Africa to import these educated people if we want them, right? That makes sense too. Why not? Like James said, Canada can afford it. We pay them, and then that helps out their economy. That sounds good to me too. That's a good solution. Anyway, but exploiting unskilled labor in Africa, that's not going to improve Africa. That's a ridiculous idea. But anyway, I enjoyed the food. And I always enjoy listening to the lectures. I love to learn. So anyway, Never Out of Season by Rob Dunn. This was a great book. And I expected it to be great. I didn't expect it to be... it wasn't on what I expected it to be on. The topic was... But anyway, it was still... I mean, it's my bag. So, Never Out of Season. In 2016, the supply of calories to humans around the world was less diverse than it had ever been. That's page 3. Scientists have named and studied over 300,000 living plant species, yet 80% of the calories consumed by humans came from just 12 species, and 90% from 15 species. There are now more acres of corn than acres of wild grassland. 4. In the Congo Basin, more than 80% of calories in human diets came from cassava, which is yucca. In parts of China, rice accounts for nearly all calories consumed. In North America, over half the carbon in the average child's body comes from corn. In the US, the poorer and more urban kids are, more of each and every one of their cells is likely to contain carbon atoms derived from either corn or sugar cane. 6. Patch of aspen in Wasatch Mountains of Utah is made up of 37,000 trees, which are genetically identical and connected by roots, and it's said to be the largest single organism. The author suggests that the Gros Michel banana plantations of Central America in the 1950s should be considered to be the largest organism ever to live on the planet. They are seedless, genetically identical, and only reproduce by suckers. Coffee rust wiped out Ceylon coffee and much of the coffee in Asia and Africa in 1800s. 160,000 hectares of the central uplands of Ceylon were a coffee monoculture. 8. They replanted with tea because the coffee was wiped out. Fusarium wilt, Panama disease, started to wipe out banana plantations in 1890. Gros Michel was replaced by Cavendish, which looks similar but doesn't taste as good. Cavendish is resistant to Fusarium wilt. Cavendish are genetically identical. 10. United Fruit Company rebranded as Chiquita in 1984. 14. Late blight of potatoes, mid-1800s. Flanders lost 92% of its crop. Belgium 87. Population booms with potatoes as dominated crop. Ireland, but by the early 1800s, a poor tenant family was likely to have little more than 1 acre of land. The only crop which could provide for them was potato. So that's page 16. By 1845, the average adult in Western Ireland consumed as many as 50 to 80 potatoes a day. I don't even know how you could do that. They often lacked clothes, shoes, and lived in houses carved out of sod. 1845. Late blight hit Ireland. Infected tumors emitted a sulfurous stink. By 1847, this stink was accompanied by that of human bodies. 23. Just as it was for the Irish, each time a child is born, our reliance on our most productive crops increases. That's corn in North America, wheat in Europe, cassava in Africa, rice in Asia. In 1847 in Ireland, even after 500,000 people died and another 500,000 fled, the task of dealing with the late blight remained. 24. Late blight is an oomycete. Oomycete, probably. Anyway. Oomycetes are not fungi or algae, even though they are often thought to be one of these two. The spores travel through the air and land on leaves. They send snake-like tubes into the cells of the leaves. The oomycetes then feed on the inside of the leaves. The leaves blacken and stink. Spores move out of the inside of the plant through the leaves, stomata. Spores travel best in windy conditions, and oomycetes grow faster than when it's wet. 26. One of the pesticides used today to kill late blight on potatoes is a mixture of copper sulfate and lime. 27. Farmers and governments still spend an estimated $6 billion a year on late blight control. 42. The blight continues to evolve. The new strains of blight include both asexual and sexual forms. Some are more aggressive. 47. Cassava pest looked like mealybug. 61. Lopez's wasp Anagyrus lopezi, lays eggs in mealybug bodies. The eggs hatch and feed on the blood, then muscle, then fat, then digestive tract, while leaving the nervous system intact. It just sounds horrible. The wasp molts, chews a hole in the exoskeleton, and flies away. 81. Cacao. Witches, broom, agriculture terrorism was suspected. 91. Most of the world's chocolate cacao. Grown in Western Africa, 20 billion a year industry, which is interesting because he was talking about that too last night. 93, after I was reading this morning. So the answer key to the story of African cacao. In any given cacao plantation shaded by rainforest trees, one might find more than 100 kinds of ants, many of them not yet named. Army ants clean the ground, trapjaw ants are predatory. Other ants have species-specific diets and eat only centipedes or snails. The most important ants for cacao live in the canopy. 94. They're territorial. Ant mosaic. The ants living in the canopy are not predators, but shepherds. Some ants live on and care for mealybugs. The ants drink their honeydew, which is their pee. The ants build tents over each clump of mealybugs to protect them from rain, pesticides, parasites, predators. The ants even relocate the mealybug to improve their sugar yield. Weaver ants rely on scale insects. When cacao was introduced to Western Africa, the ants moved in and many brought their mealybugs with them. More than 20 different ant-tended mealybug species have been found on cacao in Western Africa. The ants use cacao pods to make shelters for the mealybugs. Phytophthora, relatives of late blighted potato, infect the cacao pods. Canopy ants, such as Crematogaster, ended up transporting Phytophthora this way. Some of the mealybugs cared for by the canopy ants also transmit swollen shoot virus, CSSV. The virus makes it easier for the oomycetes to invade deep into the tree. Even trees relatively tolerant of swollen shoot virus suffer. Phytophthora is present in American cacao plantations, but not the virulent variety present in Western Africa. Weaver ant and Tetramorium aculeatum are beneficial to cacao. They eat pests and fight off other ants. Soapy water disrupts the tents, kills some mealybugs, and makes survivors more susceptible to pesticides. 98. Coffee berry borer beetle burrows into coffee seeds. It uses a fungus to detoxify coffee's caffeine and then eats it. Rust appears to be nearly unstoppable. Robusta coffee is resistant but also quite flavorless and bitter. Mealybugs infected by fungal pathogen shade coffee favors ants that favor mealybugs that favor fungus, which kills coffee rust. 100. Mealybugs are tough to kill with pesticides due to their wax coating. The pesticides did kill off populations of beneficial weaver ants, which have a long life but slow colony growth rate, so didn't recover after spraying. So pesticide use can favor mealybugs, swollen shoot disease, and frosty pod rot. Pesticides also kill the pollinators of cacao. 101. Midge populations increase with increased leaf litter on ground. 106. Persian wheat is resistant to powdery mildew. 114. Vavilov's suggestions for agriculture understand which traditional plants produced. 2. History associated with those plants. 3. Scientists and farmers who tinker with problems, including production of new hybrids and genetically engineering to speed up the process. 4. We need to understand the biology of forests and grasslands where the traditional crop and ancestors developed. 116. Hitler's SS commando unit, the Russland Samuel Commando, was created solely to take Vavilov seeds from Leningrad and research stations across the Soviet Union. Vavilov collected thousands of pounds of potatoes, more than 6,000 varieties. Each year they planted and harvested them in research plots. Potatoes don't store well, right? The plots were threatened, potatoes harvested and stored for transplant. This is by war, threatened by war. But few survived. They'd put them into boxcars and it didn't work out too well. Anyway, then they had to try to protect them from starving Russians because they wanted to eat the seeds that he'd collected, which, I mean, these things are valuable for future generations, right? Vavilov was found guilty of espionage and anti-Soviet behavior, and my guess is they didn't like the way he was holding on to the potatoes and not feeding the people with them. But, I mean, anyway, I understand. He was sentenced to death by firing squad and all his possessions confiscated. He had the largest collection of agriculture important seeds in the world and the largest collection ever gathered and new varieties. 123. Days prior to his execution date, Germans surrounded Leningrad where Vavilov stored most of his seeds. Vavilov was relocated to a prison cell where he wrote about the history of global agriculture. It was a lucky thing. Just fluked. He fluked out. 141. As of 2016, wheat accounts for 20% of all food calories consumed on Earth. Food increase, population increase, pollution increase, soil erosion, fertilizers, pesticides. Like, these all go together, right? So 147. Ford cleared 1 million hectares of Brazilian rainforest to grow rubber. He didn't want to be dependent on Asian for rubber. His crop wasn't working out so well, got blight. So he relocated, hacking down an even larger portion of the rainforest. This plot was attacked by insects and then blight. Ford lost millions of dollars. 157. Leaf blight poses as much threat as ever. Rubber exported from Asia weighs over 8.5 million metric tons and is worth over $20 billion a year. 158. Asia will get leaf blight eventually. It's just a plane ride away, they say. 174. Often the resistance of crop varieties to pests, pathogens comes from a single gene or trait for defensive capability. DDT first used in 1945. By 1954, several species of insects evolved resistance to DDT each year. 106 crop species had become resistant by 1980. None of the pesticides developed between 1973 and 1979 went more than 2 years before resistance occurred. 178. Bacillus thuringiensis helps keep the moths living. Where am I? Oh, helps keep the moths living in flower in check. In early 1900s, Japan BT threatened the silk industry. BT produces crystallized proteins that are broken down by enzymes in its alkaline gut. These activated proteins bind to proteins attached to the gut, creating tiny holes that allow other bacteria, in addition to BT, to invade. So if you think about it, like, just think for a minute. I want to repeat how he's mentioning that BT is great for flour. It helps keep the moths living in flour in check. So the BT in your flour, and then let's say, like, normally that might not be a problem for you. If your gut's not alkaline, then you're fine, right? If your gut's alkaline, though, then that crystalline structure is going to be broken down, and then what's going to happen with that to you? Just think about it. So anyway, BT can be used on organic farms, most effective against caterpillars, but BT israelensis is effective against mosquitoes. I've used that, and I've used one against caterpillars, and it works like a charm. But again, if you're eating that stuff, so this is even used on organic farms, right? And if you're eating that and your gut for some reason has turned alkaline, how are you doing? So another variety kills Colorado potato beetle larvae. 185. Between 1903 and 1983, the number of cabbage varieties found dropped from 544 to 28, carrots from 208 to 21, cauliflower from 158 to 9. Genetic engineering of crops accelerates this narrowing. 186. 1980, new bacteria in plants produced asexually, including genetically modified, could legally be patented. Sweden's seed bank could be used by any country by UN directive. If countries made money from seeds first domesticated in other regions, they needed to provide funds to those countries to be used for studying their seed heritage and improving upon it. Page 190. 94%. Agriculture's companies bought up private seed companies, so I missed that part. 94% of U.S. soy was HT, herbicide tolerant, in 2015. 89% of cotton was HT, and 84% was BT. So this is like some are both HT and BT. So BT is the bacillus. Yeah. So anyway, 81% of corn was BT, 89% HT. To delay resistance, they used I think it's refuge planting. Non-BT crop planted with the BT crop, so then the pests would attack the non-BT, right? And then then the resistance isn't built up as fast, or maybe not at all, if they're lucky. Most seeds, especially food, come from 3 companies: Monsanto, DuPont, and Syngenta. And Monsanto is way bigger than Syngenta, is not nearly as big as DuPont. So anyway, food supplies need to double by 2050, and that's unrealistic. Page 204. Pavlovsk research station contains 6,000 apple varieties, 1,000 varieties of strawberries, 1,000 currant varieties, and hundreds of other cold-tolerant nuts and fruit. 90% can be found in no other collection. Page 226. ISIS destroyed archaeological sites in Syria and Iraq. Nimrud was one of the oldest cities in the world. 229. UG99, wheat pathogen threatens wheat in all countries too poor for fungicides. So, Rob Dunn is a professor in the Department of Applied Ecology at North Carolina State University and in the Center for Macroecology, Evolution, and Climate in the Danish History Museum, Natural History Museum. He is the author of blah, 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 blah. So anyway. I definitely recommend everyone reads this book. You might get different things out of it than I was interested in. Or you might just want to check out those page numbers, make sure that I actually wrote the stuff down right. I don't know. Maybe I didn't, right? A lot of my reading is done from 4:30 till about 6:30 in the morning. So there could be errors. And well, it's never good to rely on other people for your information exclusively, right? Like what I would do is, if I'm particularly interested in something that I read out of here, is I would research it elsewhere. Try to verify it. Or disprove it, whatever. So anyway, that's it.